I think Brexit has shown up is the need for a written constitution in the UK. I mean, the Liberal Democrats are the only party really that have said consistently we need a written constitution. I didn't always support that view previously. I kind of thought the British Constitution, with its unwrittenness, was actually quite a good thing. And the reason I took that line was out of a sort of sentimentalism, because I believed in the British project, and also because countries which have written constitutions, like the USA, seem to spend an awful lot of time in courts fighting over the interpretations and applications of that constitution. And God knows we'd be having those kind of legal battles going on in the UK all the time if we have a written constitution. And I thought, well, no, by having it not written down, it spares us from all that. But I think the French have probably got the right solution. Most people don't know the French have a written constitution, which I have a copy of and I've read. It's excellent. But they also have this thing called the Constitutional Court, which is, it's not a privy council. It does one thing and one thing only. It adjudicates disputes over constitutional matters and interpretations. If there's a power battle between a president, parliament, prime minister, whatever, judiciary, this Constitutional Court sits and makes a judgment. It has the best legal advice of the French legal experts, but it's made up of all the past presidents of France, all the great thinkers, the savants, Chirac and all these kind of people sit on the Constitutional Court, and I think this is a brilliant idea. I think Britain should have a written constitution, and it should create a constitutional court on this French model to adjudicate the disputes, not going all the time to like the Supreme Court in America. They need a constitutional court in America too, actually, and I think the French model is probably the one to adopt. So there have been some lessons we should learn from Brexit, but I think it's looking increasingly like, I hope, I pray to the absolute that it will be stopped even this coming week, because the likelihood is that enough intelligent Conservative and other parliamentarians are going to insist that Theresa May takes her hard Brexit option off the table. She's been using that as a kind of bully stick to terrorise her party and the British people. I don't know what's got into the woman. I mean, is she terrified of her extreme right who want this hard Brexit? It's the most bizarre display of any democratic constitutional mix-up I've ever seen, and she has to take that off the table. I think enough MPs are going to revolt and insist on that. I'll leave it to them to work out all the details. And then once that's done, there are really two options. And I think this has to be put back to the British people. We can vote. I will vote. Do we want Theresa May's deal, or do we want to remain in the European Union under existing terms? I know what I and most of my friends will be voting for. To me, it's just, you don't have to be an intellectual to see that it's much, much more obvious to stay in and to help reform it from within. Of course, there are some people, die-hard Brexiteers, who will say, no, Theresa May's deal's great. I personally hope she only gets about 3 votes, because it's the most ridiculous proposal I've ever seen in my lifetime. Anyway, I hope that happens. I want to say something about anti-Semitism, which has come up, and friends of mine have said, what's going on in Britain? What's all this allegations of anti-Semitism everywhere? One of the most disturbing things about Brexiteers that I've noticed from the trolls and the people that have, insulted me and other colleagues is that Brexiteers seem to be very, very anti-elitist. Their position is, we hate elites, we hate experts, we hate intellectuals, and we hate Jews, because they're often experts, elites, and intellectuals. So it would logically follow they would be hated. And not only that, but because there's a high propensity to go down what I call pseudo-conspiracy theory routes, Brexiteers go with the conspiracy theory. The Jews are responsible for everything that's wrong in the world. And the EU, Jewish plot, bring it down, let's get out. I find that disturbing because it's, I was one of the batch of secondary school teachers that were trained to teach citizenship studies. My job in secondary schools was to teach the intellectual tools to make thinking through complicated political choices possible. You need to have certain understanding of how the Constitution works. You need to know about British history. You need to know about democracy. You need to know about political theory, and you need to know something about ethics and political philosophy. And all these things are part of, citizenship studies. And I'd love to see more of it in schools, not just in Britain, but around the world. And I think it's an important subject. It should be on the curriculum as a discrete subject. I often had battles with headmasters. Even though I'm head of citizenship, they would say, no, we don't want anyone actually teaching citizenship. We'll just do a bit of it in geography, a bit of it in history, and pretend we're doing it. No, that's not good enough. It should be taught as a discrete subject. If we had that, we'd have the political literacy as a nation, that we wouldn't be falling down this kind of YouTube-driven conspiracy theory, flat earth society types who unfortunately the human mind is very susceptible to influence, and anti-Semitism presents itself as a rational explanation for how the world is. Elites causing trouble, we hate them, let's hate the Jews. And so you see people, daubing swastikas on Jewish graves and things. It's lazy thinking, folks. It's anti-intellectualism is what this is about. My dear Jewish friends that I've met over the years, one of them, was my PhD advisor and supervisor. These are brilliant minds, and we should respect and give thanks for the Jewish people, their incredible history and their survival. As chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East, I want a final peace settlement between Israel and Palestine. I want the rival messianic worldview opponents to come together in peaceful discourse and sit in that peace tent on the Dome of the Rock and discuss how to live in harmony. Let everybody recognise everybody else's messiahs. And then there won't be a need for this final war to end wars. What about the European Union? Well, it is doing its best to create a two-state solution. It's trying to be fair and even-handed to the needs of Palestinian people. It even funded a port in Gaza. I think it funded an airport. It's tried to help Palestinians, but it's also firmly committed to the viability and security of the Israeli state. And many Jewish people live in Europe and work here in France and elsewhere. And recently it had a conference, or it had a commemoration service in the European Parliament for World Holocaust Remembrance Day, which normally takes place on the 27th of January every year. The European Parliament held an important service on the 23rd of January, with rabbis there and speeches and so on. The European Union is committed to what I call philo-Semitism, which is the antidote to anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is being against the Semites. It's an intellectual folly. And the man who invented the term later apologized for it. He realized it was a silly idea. The only solution is philo-Semitism, which is loving the contributions of all the Semitic peoples to world culture and civilization, going back to the Phoenicians who invented the alphabet, the Babylonians who invented astrology and astronomy, the Hamito-Semitic Egyptians who gave us geometry and pyramids and eye makeup and hieroglyphs and, the worship of Isis and so many other good and wonderful things, and a lot of medicine and also a lot of philosophy, because Plato and Pythagoras all studied in Egypt. And the Arabs who gave us, the Quran, the amazing text, which I've done a commentary on, and which is a seal of the prophets. I'm not going to say Muhammad is the only or last prophets, because I think that would show a rather mean God if he's only going to send, if that's it and the supply chain's broken up. No. God is constantly, the Allah behind Allah, the supreme Allah of the universe, constantly wants to waken us all up to that divine gnosis that Sufism and Kabbalah and so on talk about. And the duty of the world Messianic Avatar and Sershan Council is to re-energize and activate all those that are on the job at the moment. I've met many seers and sages. I know that this planet is peopled with incredible Sufi teachers and realized sages. Well, they've got to come out of the caves and start teaching, because idiots and the mob have taken over the hen house, I'm afraid. So the European Union is part of that initiatory project. This is why it's supported with Erasmus, these wonderful scholarships for youngsters to travel all over Europe. This is why it supports freedom of movement, because just like in the days of the forming of the universities in France, at Paris and Montpellier and Bologna and so on, it is the right and duty of every young scholar to go and visit some other country and study there. In the old Druid system, which prevailed in Europe thousands of years ago, you were always brought up with another Druid, hundreds of miles away from your home. It's the learning from the other that makes you more human, that teaches you compassion. When I was a child, I was sent by my mother and father to come and study in France. I lived in Paris 2 weeks every year for a few years and learned French, and I learned to love France. I learned to think like a French person. I learned to see the world from French eyes, which is profound and sophisticated. And it complements, it's not better than the English or the Scottish or the Irish, it's complementary too. And it gave me a broader picture. Well, that's a proper Druid's education, if you want. And so let all the children of Europe have that. Let all the children of England, where I've taught for many years, have that joy of learning and travelling in Germany or Holland or Italy. These places are like living museums full of treasures and priceless heritage. I've been round the Vatican Museum in total awe. I want my kids, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren to have that possibility, to go and study in Rome. I think it's disgraceful the British have just cut their funding to the European University Institute in Florence. I mean, how petty and small-minded these people are. Theresa May is, I'm afraid, not a very well-educated woman. It's interesting, you can't get to be president of the Turkish Republic unless you have at least a degree. This is why Bülent Ecevit, one of the great Turkish politicians in the 20th century, never got to be president. He was only prime minister because he didn't have a degree. I think that's quite a good idea, that you have a sort of a license of qualification standard for your senior politicians. And I think to be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is a huge responsibility. Some of the greatest who've done that, have been highly educated and highly wise. I don't think Theresa May is going to come into that category when future historians judge her and the folly of Brexit. I think she's going to come pretty much near the bottom of the class. But where do people like that go and learn? I mean, I ran meetings in Parliament. I chaired about 30 meetings with Lord Ennals to try and get philosophical debate going in the House of Lords and Commons in one of the committee rooms. I think they need a philosophy club. I mean, I can't do it personally. Please will some philosophers in Britain set up a philosophy club in Parliament and have debates and discussions. They can listen to these talks and actually do some thinking. It shouldn't be a party issue. The overall intellectual achievement of politicians needs improving. Morally, it's a scandal what Theresa May and her cronies have got away with. They shouldn't be in power, in my opinion. And I'm hoping that they will, the British people, who I have confidence in, will see through their shenanigans, which, as I say, have been funded partly by abroad agencies trying to bring down the UK and the European Union. So let's have a philo-Semitic approach to international relations in the Middle East. It's just come out recently that the great close advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, Seamus, I can't remember his surname, is very fiercely pro-Palestinian, but to the point of being very fiercely anti-Israel. And there's a very fine line. I think it's wonderful to want a Palestinian state and be an activist for that. But I think you've got to do it in a way that brings Israeli public opinion and Israeli people with you. I've always taken this view, and I will to my dying day. We have to have a two-state solution. And that means both communities walk to the peace line together and feel secure and safe to do so. That's why I set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East. And Seamus Milne, I think he's called, doesn't see it like that. And he's very closely advising Jeremy Corbyn. And so I think this has kind of made it difficult for Corbyn to realise that he has to be unequivocal in his demand for philo-Semitism to be the answer for not just the Labour Party, but for any future British government that will help facilitate a genuine peace in the Middle East. Tony Blair saw this, but unfortunately, because of his damaged reputation over participating in the Iraq War in 2003, his credentials were blown to smithereens. He couldn't bring peace, although he would have loved to. I'd love to interview Tony Blair, I would just say, and ask him some very detailed questions about the events leading up to 2003, and did he realise, the implications. And I've put out some feelers for that. I mean, I don't know, interview, discussion, call it what you want, a sort of mutual interview perhaps. As a philosopher, I think I used to live close to where Tony Blair used to live in Islington, and I've been in touch with him from time to time. So I'm going to stop in a minute. I really want to just finish by talking about peace ethics and the importance of ensuring that, as I say, the heart of this whole talk has been ensuring that our commitment to peace is at the highest, of the ethical hierarchy of choices that we make. We can choose power, we can choose fame, we can choose, to control others. You can go the Stalin route or the Herod the Great route. What I'm saying to humanity is let's pause from that. Let's cancel that power route, which unfortunately too many people are going down. And let's take the path of love. Let's go the route that enables humanity to find a solution to our grave problems. And that, once we reopen the Golden Gate in our hearts, once we refocus our light, then I think it will happen in reality. And Brexit just needs to be awoken from. It was a nightmare. The sooner we wake up from it, the better. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for listening. And may the forces of light succeed.